Hello, everyone. Hello. My name's Zahila Karen. I lead the decarbonisation analysis at the Lloyd's Register Maritime Decarbonisation Hub. I'm based in London. We are a not-for-profit place providing research to the industry on decarbonising shipping. So we've done a lot of thinking about alternative fuels for maritime as well. So this will be a lively debate. So the question of the next hour, alternative fuels, which is the right one? I think the organisers were trying to be controversial with that question to begin with. Well, I mean, the big news that I have for you, there's probably not one size fits all, and I'm sure that many of our panellists will say that as well. But we've got an eclectic bunch today, so I think we're going to have wide-ranging views. So on our panel, virtually logging in on Zoom, we have Berit Heinemann, the Head of Decarbonisation Business Development for Maersk. Hi, Berit.
Hello. Hello, everyone, and pleasure to be able to participate virtually at least, and sorry I can't be there in person, and looking very much forward to the debate.
Thanks, Berit. And in the room we have Andrea Slotter, Head of Sustainable Development at the Port of Helsinki. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
We have Remel Thijs, Senior Project Manager at TBA Group. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Perfect pronunciation, Maria.
Excellent. We have Christopher Stanek, Head of Maritime Applications at Now. Welcome, Christopher.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me here.
And last but not least, we have Ian Kersing, the Senior Maritime Expert at McKinsey. Welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me.
So we have about an hour, or less than an hour, for this debate. So we might have time at the end, 50 minutes, for some spontaneous questions from the floor. As you know, this is a huge, complex, dynamic question that is affecting all of every decision we're making. So to help us get a bit more of a handle on this, I was thinking, why don't we break this discussion down slightly and focus the discussion slightly, structure it. So at the Maritime Decarbonisation Hub, we've been looking at this for a long time, and there are three kind of different areas we can look at. We can look at the technology readiness of these alternative fuels. We can also look at the investment readiness of these fuels, and we can look at the community readiness of these fuels. And that's kind of how I'm going to structure this conversation and let the speakers kind of give their opinions on it. Before we start, I think it'll be nice to get a little bit of an intro from each of the panelists. If you can tell us a little bit about what each of your companies does, because it's all very wide-ranging and there's lots of different companies here today. So I want to kick off with Berit, who's logging in virtually. Do you mind giving us a start?
Yes, thank you very much, and happy to do that. So Maersk is an end-to-end logistics provider and also a very large container shipping company. And we have ambitious decarbonization targets to be net zero in 2040 across all our business area, both the ocean part, the container shipping, and also our landside operations. And regarding container shipping, we are working on alternative fuels and are pursuing three pathways, and which we are going to discuss further on. And we have ordered dual fuel vessels for operation on green methanol, which we are implementing in our fleet. So this is very much in short what my focus will be today, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Berit. Ian?
Yeah, I work for McKinsey. McKinsey is a strategy consultancy. We provide advice to our clients, and in the maritime sector, and specifically on this topic, that relates to what kind of future fuel and propulsion choices do you have? What ways do you have to decarbonize your fleet? What ways do you have to meet your targets within specific cost constraints? So that's what we're doing. We're doing research in terms of what fuels are available, at what cost, and when, and how our clients can make the transition to the decarbonization targets that they set themselves.
Thank you. Christopher?
Yes, I'm working for NOW. NOW is a German federal-owned organization based in Berlin, We are working for the German government to transact different funding programs, public strategies. We're also working at technical advisors for the German government, and we have the different technologies in our scope, also for maritime applications in the field of OPS systems, build-up of infrastructure for the production of synthetic fuels for hydrogen, electrolyzer capacities, and as well as the retrofit and new build of ships using alternative fuels on board.
Thank you. Andreas?
Yeah, the Port of Helsinki has been working with the decarbonization issues for actively now for about 4 years. Been focusing on emissions in the port area, vessel emissions, operator emissions, stuff like that, onshore power, energy efficiency, these type of solutions. But now we're updating our strategy, and of course we're thinking about what are the next steps. We've been looking at emissions in the harbor, the port area, but as we all know, the majority of emissions happen on the actual sea voyage. So how can the port help and facilitate that change, and especially a port that is not, as big as in Rotterdam, for example, where we are now. But we can't afford to take sort of risks. We need to be able to predict what's actually coming to make the right decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Remmel Thijs. I'm a senior project manager with TVA. We're located here in Rijswijk, very close by. And we are a specialized consultancy for ports and terminals. So not so much involved with the vessel side of things, but really focused on the ports and terminals. For terminals, we typically assist our customers with analysis of what is a good layout, what is the mode of operation that an operator would choose for its future operation. And more we see questions about how can we also become green and what options are out there. So we assist our customers with that.
Okay, brilliant. So I'm going to launch straight into it. So like I said before, we're going to split this into 3 sections. So technology, economic, and community readiness of these fuels. So let's start with the technology, and I'm going to pull in Berit on the video call here on this. I know you are very close to green fuel project developments and your experience around that. We'd like to hear a little bit more about where you see the biggest technological advancements and perhaps some of the hurdles that are still there on the production side of these fuels.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much. And actually, what I would like to start with is to say that we are pursuing 3 fuel pathways as our priority pathways. I mean, biodiesel, we are already using this fuel today in our fleet. Green methanol, we are implementing it by having ordered the green methanol vessels, of which the feeder vessel will start in 2023, and the 12 ocean-going vessels, they will start arriving in the beginning of 2024. And then we are also working on green ammonia. And maybe just in terms of technology readiness on the vessel, one reason why we have chosen to implement green methanol in our fleet is because that is doable and the experience with methanol as a marine fuel exists, whereas green ammonia is not yet ready for that. So on the vessel side there, we are focusing on feasibility studies, technical feasibility studies, safety studies to make it ready. On the fuel production side, different pathways for green methanol and green ammonia production. The technologies are there. They have also been demonstrated. I mean, some have not been upscaled, but as we see it, one of the hurdles has been the demand and supply, and I guess we are going to come to that in the investment readiness in a little bit later section. But I would say from the technology side, a lot of the technologies are there, but for example, as one technology, electrolysis technology, it is very well known and demonstrated, but the scale up of the entire supply chain also needs to happen so that the production of the green fuels can be scaled up So that technology maturity gets higher, and also that there can be cost out in fuel production costs.
That's very interesting. You mentioned methanol there. I guess the discussion around direct air capture and the technology advancements in that area, where do you kind of see that trend going, and how much more of a reliance do we have on that really coming forwards?
Yeah, of course, green methanol has the limitation, if you will, that it is a carbon-containing fuel, so you need a biogenic carbon source to produce this fuel. And of course, direct air capture could sort of break that constraint, in the sense then you would have an unlimited source of carbon. Currently, the prices for CO2 captured by direct air capture are high, but of course, I mean, there's a lot of development going on, and we follow that closely, because we also have an interest in that. And I think it is really, for the future fuel mix, it will really be important how that develops. If this carbon really becomes a limitation, and then one would be more looking to fuels like ammonia, or if direct air capture can be deployed at scale. But I think further development will show that.
Thanks. Yeah. Just actually following on from this, I guess NOW has funded a lot of projects around sort of hydrogen and fuel cell technology. In your experience looking at these projects and what's being funded right now, what sort of technology gaps are still there, or what are the things that you're filling in with these sort of funded pilot projects?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, and I can completely agree with Berit that what we have done in the first phase of the funding program, this has been started in 2008 for hydrogen and fuel cell technology in Germany. And the government has invested about 700 million euro, additional 700 million euro have come from the industry. And we have kick-started with kind of R&D projects in the field of different products, of different applications on board ships, but also in the car sector, in the train sector, for aviation applications, etc., etc. And on the other hand, also on the electrolyzers technology. And where we are now, I can say that we are rather directly close to the market, I would say. So the big question is how to scale up and where to scale up, and which technologies have the potential to be combined. As I can give you an example, for example, when you look at the LNG technology that has been grown up in the last years, and there's also the potential to give there a green direction in using, for example, bio-LNG and synthetic LNG in the future. And it's kind of has always been seen kind of a bridge technology for greener fuels in the future. But what is already there is kind of, we have biogas facilities, biogas plants. In Germany, for example, we have the biggest amount of biogas facilities of whole Europe, and they have used the biogas for production for electricity as a renewable energy source. And now they are looking to the mobility sector, for example, and they have the potential to give the amount of biogas produced to liquefy it down to have a bio-LNG source, for example, for the mobility applications. And additionally, you can use the CO2 of the biogas to produce methanol, biomethanol. And in combination with that, you can also produce synthetic fuels, where you can use electrolyzer capacities to, for the production of of synthetic methane, but also of synthetic methanol. But what is needed at the end is also the willingness to invest in these fuels that are produced. And there we come to what we have heard before, to Fit for 55 package, that we have an incentive in the FuelEU Maritime, but also what we need on a global scale is a kind of a market-based measurement.
Yeah, you've touched on quite a few things that I guess lends itself to being investment ready and scaling as well, and the issues around the availabilities of these feedstocks. I just want to keep on the subject of technology and particularly safety. You know, when we talk about ammonia, a lot of comments about the toxicity of ammonia or the flammable nature of these alternative fuels and the different kind of characteristics that they have that perhaps, you know, people working at ports or on seafarers, you know, haven't had that prior experience of handling. I'd like to hear a bit about your experience as a port of Helsinki with how you're sort of navigating this kind of future fuel world. Are there feasibility studies? You know, you've got extensive LNG bunkering already. I mean, are there lessons learned? Have you got any sort of, you know, lessons for the other ports in the room here as well in terms of that kind of experience?
Yeah. We're also trying to find out what the next thing for us is going to be able to prepare for it, and this is really a large issue. I like that you mentioned LNG actually, because that's been a very big stepping stone for us. First of all, because of the possibilities it opens up in the future, as you said, with biogas and synthetics, but also strictly from the port point of view, the whole process of building up the accreditation process and then going through it repeatedly with different both bunkers and bunker buyers and the whole community in the port. So I think that taught us as an organization to be more agile, and because we hadn't, you know, gotten a new fuel in the port since, you know, going back hundreds of years almost. So it was actually a very big thing, especially regarding the safety regulations, because they are so stringent compared to the older fuels. And there we also noticed in these accreditation processes that you can't really talk about sort of one set of safety requirements, because just in the neighboring municipality, the local authorities, they made very different demands on the safety process. So you can't just assume that there's going to be one set of safety regulations that are going to be accepted worldwide. You really have to build up the local knowledge with authorities and within the port. But I think it all boils down to sort of being ready as an organization to embrace the new when and if it comes, regardless of what the actual fuel is. The process is still the same.
Okay, so I guess it's a case of getting parties ready to kind of state their intention about what fuels they perhaps would be bunkering in future, and creating that sort of collaborative effort between ship owners and yourself. I mean, are you getting a response from, you know, clients or customers that use the port in terms of their intent?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that now, just recently, maybe the last half a year or so, a lot of cargo owners have contacted us directly, telling us that they're looking at the whole supply chain of their product and wanting to have a discussion on what's the port's role and what can the port do. So I think this goes to show that there's a change happening where the end customer is willing to pay more for these type of technologies. But as you said, you know, communication with all the involved actors, and there's a lot in the port, really quite a few, is the important thing.
I guess at TBA you look at port operations. That's kind of looking at the microcosm of that role within the port limits as well. Can you speak a bit in terms of kind of the exploration of different fuels? And, you know, there's so many stands here looking at reach trackers and cranes and things like that. Like, can you talk a bit about kind of the experiences you're seeing in terms of how ports are redesigning to kind of manage the decarbonisation problem?
Yeah, no, sure. So I think what we have seen historically is that there's a lot of carbon emissions emitted in terminals for container handling. There's a lot of diesel for terminal trucks, for mobile equipment, for RTGs. And I think in the last few years we are now starting to really see a change towards, can we go more greener? And the interesting part is, of course, we don't have the problem as with a vessel that we're moving. We are stationary in that sense. So and already a lot of the equipment import is electric. So we have the ship-to-shore cranes, RMG cranes, it's all electric equipment. And it's relatively easy to go green with that. It will cost money to have a different supplier, but the infrastructure is already there. With RTGs, it's a very common type of equipment. We already in the past 5 years we've seen a lot of terminals making the change from diesel-driven to hybrid, where the fuel consumption becomes a lot less, and electrification as well. So having electric equipment via bus bar, via cable reel, powering the equipment. And I think, which is very interesting in the last, 1-2 years, is also the mobile equipment is becoming more and more available as electric equipment. Today we have heard about Konecranes coming out with batteries for mobile harbor cranes, for straddle carriers. We have seen other suppliers come out with electrified reach trucks, terminal trucks. So a lot of focus has really been on how can we utilize electricity more for powering the equipment in ports.
So I guess you're kind of saying that there's a bit more of a steer from your perspective towards electrification of these port-based equipment instead of running on HVO or alternative fuels in that sense, from your experience?
No, indeed. So there are a few pilots, I would say, with, for instance, hydrogen. There are a few pilots. Can we run a terminal truck? Can we run a reach stacker on hydrogen? But yeah, the number of cases is really quite limited. So it's a relative easy win to go for electrification, and then to go green. It's that can be quite an easy step.
Okay, let's address the second thing, which is about investment readiness, and in terms of pricing mechanisms and the things that we perhaps need to kind of kickstart that investment readiness of the industry. So we've seen a lot of technology progress. What is actually stopping scalable solutions from emerging? And I'd like to come to Arjen at the end here.
So we're serving mostly ship owners, and there is a portion among them that are really keen and wanting to be kind of first movers in this industry. But what we just discussed, ammonia, methanol, hydrogen, batteries, and then you can have green, blue, gray, whatever versions of it. It can be with different sources of CO2, where to source it. So the problem is incredibly complex for them. I think what they do not want to do is to make a decision that backs them into a corner. And if certain things do not happen, for instance, if CO2 prices that are expected are not coming on the market, if EU Fit for 55 will be slimmed down. They're discussing the ETS scheme right now. They want to have something that is at least robust for the set of things that they might expect that are going to happen going forward, or at least have a platform that is flexible enough for them to anticipate particular changes. Primarily focusing on one type of fuel over the next 5 to 10 years, but then have at least a transition scenario in mind of what might happen the years after that, and possibly have a kind of retrofit option for their vessel somewhere down the line in one of the intermediate dry docks that is coming up. So I think from their perspective, it's like, they're willing to do it. Right now it's a risky choice. Some customers are willing to pay. The banks are kind of incentivizing them to kind of move forward and are ready to finance the ships. The shipyards still need to kind of optimize the designs. I think what we're seeing is that there will be massive focus, at least in the first 10 years, on making the ships first more energy efficient before you start transiting to some of these alternative fuels. but that's already ongoing as well. So I think the willingness is there in the industry that you can't make it yet cost competitive, but that is hopefully all kind of coming together by the end of this decade.
In terms of sort of, I'm coming to you, Berit, next. In terms of sort of the investments, and there's a lot of talk about offtake agreements. We're hearing a lot of partnerships between fuel suppliers and ship owners in order to secure their future fuel purchases. And these agreements, you're hearing a lot about that in the news now. Is this kind of a precursor to us then moving into a carbon price? What are the sort of things and mechanisms or commercial signals that we need to really get people to invest in delivering these fuels at scale?
Yes, and thank you very much for that question. And I'm very happy also to add to Arjen's perspective. So at Maersk we have also been seeing, I mean, this chicken and egg problem that is a lot discussed. I mean, who moves first and what triggers the transition, and what we then decided is to order these 12 ocean-going vessels. I mean, this first feeder vessel, but also the 12 ocean-going vessels, to bring a defined demand to the market. Because once these 12 vessels are phased in, they will use around 500,000 tons of green methanol per year. That's about 40,000 tons per vessel. And this really brings a defined demand to the market. And we knew very well that green methanol is not produced at scale today in the amounts that we will need for the vessels. But our intention was really that this can kickstart the transition by bringing demand and by enabling the partnerships. And talking about partnerships, we have earlier this year announced 6 partnerships that we have made with companies who develop green methanol projects. And we think that that collaboration is really the key here across the value chain, working closely together. So to bring this first project forward, I mean, where we bring the demand, but also where we work closely together, because there are risks and there are unknowns. But we see it as very important that these first projects happen, because they then also will enable cost out of the technologies and a decrease in the production price. But in this partnership, it is about getting the pieces of the puzzle to match, if you will, so that green fuel production projects can move forward.
I think you raise a really interesting point about the aggregation of demand that sends that signal to getting everyone to move as well. But just thinking a bit broader, and I'm coming to you, Christopher, as you know, with the work and the funding projects, not just in maritime, but you were discussing shipping, aviation as well. Is there the appetite for those two sectors to come together? Is there that coordination? You know, there's a lot of talk about cross-sector collaboration. Is that really going to happen? Like, is that a credible reality?
Yes, thank you for that question, and I can only agree with Arjen and what has Berit said. First, what is needed is the regulatory framework for planning security of your investments. Second, what is needed is the collaboration, and there we come to the cross-sector collaboration perspective, and it is not only from perspective between aviation and shipping sector, but also the large amounts that are coming to the market regarding the industry sector and the heating sector, for example. And when we talk about the future fuel demands, we have also always keep in mind the large amount that we have in the large-scale sector of these applications, where we have the chemical industries, where we have the cement industries, where they have big amounts of green hydrogen in the future. And the question is how this hydrogen will come to the markets, how we get this hydrogen to the grid. What kind of hydrogen carrier is the best one in the future that is transported via tankers to the destinations where it is needed. And there we talk about also the collaboration in the field of methanol, for example. Methanol together with other industries that are already using methanol as a fossil basis now fuel, but in the future that are also interested to get green. And there you can have a common business case that when you're working together. And when we talk about ammonia, for example, as a hydrogen carrier in the future, and we have always all these calculations in mind when we talk about the effectiveness, the efficiency of producing green ammonia in the future. And that's why we talk about this. And ammonia could be really something in the future, but a lot of development work has to be done in this field. And it is needed to kickstart now with the technologies that you have, and where you can get kind of funding for market activation, and where you have on the other side the potential to give funding for R&D work. And that is what we are doing in Germany. We have two major fields for the production perspective. One is the R&D perspective, where we're going to invest 640 million euros for production facilities, and on the other hand, we have the market activation for specific production applications, where we talk about large scale, where we talk about a gigawatt basis for production of fuels, where we are going to invest 900 million euros again.
That's interesting, because obviously in the panel we obviously have MERS on the private side, we have NOW on public federal funding. Like, as the Port of Helsinki, you know, you've looked in the past, or you have already installed things like solar panel, you've looked at OPS installation, that kind of financing. How important is that sort of public-private, public funding element to actually assisting the energy transition?
Yeah, we received EU funding for our onshore power installations mainly, and of course it's important. You know, the business cases are difficult, to be sure, and we've started obviously where it's easiest for us with liner traffic, for example, where you have the same vessel going back and forth many times per day. So first of all, it makes the whole process easier of the discussion with the shipping company. Then you can make the connections for the one vessel, and then you get the very large emission savings because you have the same vessel there every day. But still it's difficult, and that's where the public funding comes in.
And also, we touched on a point about willingness to pay, Ian. And in terms of your clients and your customer base, is there sort of this sort of tide of change in that consumers are actually more willing to pay? I mean, there's a lot of research that says container segments have a lot of pressure from their consumers. Are they actually? Is that real? Is that being realized?
Yes and no. So you cannot say that's a homogeneous market. I mean, there's lots of end customers behind it, right? Obviously, we all know the retailers and whatever, the clothes that we buy, the food that we buy, but there's lots of intermediate products, and even scrap metal, whatever, that's being transported in container, and the willingness to pay for decarbonizing scrap metal is lower than zero. So, I mean, you cannot generalize and say the willingness to pay in container is high. It's high with a certain set of customers, but not all of them. But I mean, if you compare the cost of running a fossil fuel ship and a green ship, like Berit was explaining on the methanol ships from Maersk, there is a significant gap on the cost side to operate these vessels. And doing a back of the envelope calculation will show approximately like $300-400 per ton of CO2 is required if you run that vessel purely on green fuels these days. And somewhere that gap needs to be closed. Right now it's the container lines plus a portion of customers that are willing to pay. Hopefully carbon taxes will close some of that gap. Hopefully the banks will step in and provide better finance. Hopefully the technology sector will speed up its cost down trajectory of these technologies that closes this gap. So it's all kind of future bets that we're placing right now in terms of hoping that somewhere down the line in 5 to 10 years we might be more cost competitive and hopefully overtake fossil fuels at some point.
There is also the topic of feedstock availability and the kind of the competitiveness of getting access to biofuels. I mean, can you speak a bit more about that sort of concern in terms of certain production routes for certain fuels as well?
maybe some of my other panelists can talk to this. I just know that there is a general shortage of biogenic CO2 and there is a shortage of biomass available. The ultimate zero carbon fuel that we're aiming for, like green ammonia that doesn't have any carbon atoms in it, it has to come from renewable fuel production, probably emerging somewhere in the southern hemisphere where the cost of electricity is extremely low. But that is a very scarce quantity at the moment. So I think across all the different fuel types, we're looking at scarcity of fuel at the moment.
Maybe I can add something to this, because you have to look at the perspective at the end of the different players. And for ports, for example, it is also very interesting to have all these demands that are upcoming in the next years in the mind. Not only for shipping applications, but also, as I have said before, for heating sector, industry applications, etc., etc. That's why we talk about build-up of infrastructure for the import of green fuels. And the import of, for example, we start with LNG, yeah? But when you look at the projects that are realized now, they are talking about hydrogen ready, but they are calling about ammonia ready LNG terminals. That meaning that they are prepared to use ammonia as energy source in the future, hydrogen cracking from the ammonia, and to give these cracked hydrogen to the grids. And when you talk about, we talk about also other projects where you have a big amount of hydrogen needed on a local basis, for example, for cement industries, for example, for chemical applications, where they have really a big green hydrogen demand. And where it's also possible to have terminals like in Japan, to have terminals specifically for liquefied hydrogen. And for the application of direct applications of hydrogen in ferries, in harbor ferries, for example, for different refueling stations of mobility utilizations close to the port. So in the future, we see the market potentials. They are very different from different perspectives, and every port has to decide on what direction this can go, and what is the local demand, what is the supply chain demand to bring these fuels to the hinterland, and also what is the kind of demand needed from the shipping sector additionally.
You raise a good point, I guess, as well, because you're looking at all these new infrastructures, storage facilities. There's an element of crew training, right? And investing in that crew training element of it as well. I just want to take a bit of a pivot and move to like the community readiness, the kind of final pillar of this as we kind of slowly wrap this up. Berit, I'm going to come to you with regards to, because we had the European Commission here earlier today talking about the Fuel EU maritime regulation, and just more generally about regulatory impacts or risks for certain production routes or certain alternative fuels. Can you say a little bit more about your kind of perspective on how regulatory risks are really going to map out the choice of future fuels tomorrow?
Yes, yes, I can do that, and and I would like to start by emphasizing that what was mentioned before. I mean, this level playing field or closing the competitiveness gap, we see this as very important. I mean, we see this really as a need from regulation. Also, one aspect that we see as very important is also, and this ties into what you mentioned about choosing the fuels of tomorrow, if you will, this aspect of life cycle analysis, about the assessment of the green fuels, which we think also needs to be done by well-to-wake life cycle analysis, taking all greenhouse gases into account. We think this is very important to assess to make a thorough and consistent assessment of the different green fuels, so that we make sure that these green fuels are sustainable. So these aspects, I mean, both a price on carbon market-based measure, or I mean, closing the competitiveness gap, and the life cycle analysis, we see this as absolutely key in these legislations.
It's also interesting, I guess, because the SSI published 15 sustainability criteria that kind of fall outside of the remit of not just the LCA analysis. It looks at different parts of sourcing of these materials, but also human rights, water consumption, all of these wider impacts as well. I mean, is anyone on the panel willing to talk a little bit about kind of where's the onus, where's the responsibility to ensure the sustainability of the fuels? Is it on shipping or is it on the producers? Have those discussions even been had in-house? I'm going to open floor this one.
Maybe I can first start. As you look at the Fit for 55 package, you have different elements, as we have heard in the morning. One element is the RED 3 regulation that is prepared. And within the RED, you have the sustainability criteria. And the RED is addressing the fuel supplier that are bringing the fuel to the market. And there are strict regulations regarding kind of fuels are brought to the market and if they are sustainable or not, and how they are being seen, like a green fuel or not. And on the other hand, you have the AFIR for the build-up of infrastructures, and you have the FuelEU Maritime. And you have a strict connection between the FuelEU Maritime and together with the RED. Yeah, within the FuelEU Maritime, the RED is addressed. And when you have the fuel supplier perspective that is doing future investments to bring these fuels to the market, there's also the potential when addressing the shipping sector in the FuelEU Maritime that you have kind of amounts also for shipping applications, but this has to grow. So we have to start with low amounts that being higher and higher in the next years. So, but somewhere, and you have to start one day to bring these amounts of fuel to the markets. And what we have done together with the Danish colleagues, that we have given a proposal to the European Commission that we have said, okay, the technology is ready and we have the capacity to build up also the electrolyzers for producing fuels of non-biological origin, RFNBOs, and we wanted to have a sub-target within this. And as we have heard today, this is also a vision of the European Commission, but we will see how other member states will see this.
That's great. I'm just going to wrap this up with one last question for everyone. This is open floor. So what do you think, in your opinion, are our sort of top priorities this decade to really accelerate the uptake of alternative fuels? So I'm gonna pass it down the line, and you can talk about your top priorities for this decade.
Well, I think it's interesting to see that our different players approach this differently. Yeah? So some terminal operators, they say, we go green, and we put a date on it. And others are a bit more reluctant and basically wait and see what the market is going to do. So I think it will be interesting to see how the market will develop in terms of commitment of organizations to become greener. Some shipping lines are leading here, some terminal operators are leading, but many other terminals are basically watching what is going to happen. And there are a few examples of terminals that are really far. So a terminal in India will be basically carbon neutral in 2025, so that's 3 years from now. That's pretty amazing. But that's the front runner, and it will become very interesting to see how long it will take for the other terminals to follow, and with what pace they will do so.
I think regulatory clarity Fit for 55 is on everyone's lips at the moment, and I think we're all really dying to find out exactly in what form it comes out of the machinery, so to speak, because that's going to, regardless of exactly what it looks like, it's going to speed up a lot, I think, and it's going to make it easier to have the discussions that are needed between the different actors. The other one thing I'd just like to highlight again is communication, between the different actors. Speak up on your ideas, what you're thinking about doing. It need to be very concrete, but talk to the actors around you to make sure that everything is in place once you are able to take the actual step into investment. So I think those two things are sort of both in the short and medium term is what's going to drive.
Okay, for the uptake of the green fuels, I would say first what I have said before and what is also involved in the Green Corridor project landscape, that you have to kickstart a collaboration between different market players for the build-up of infrastructure to refuel the ships on the major shipping routes. And this can be really a kick-starting point, and where you have different players involved. So this kind of innovation that is brought to the market, the kind of different sorts, the kind of different perspective on the build-up of infrastructures, but also on the first-runner perspective of the utilization of different fuels on board the ships. And second, what is needed is level playing field. I mean, a level playing field you can get with the right regulatory framework. When you do it on an international level, and what I'm talking about is we need really market-based measures to have an incentive to use these fuels on a global scale and on an international level, that the shipping companies are also willing to pay the extra amounts, and it is also needed to have such kind of acceptance of the whole shipping company, but also on the ship perspectives, the IKEAs, etc., as we heard before.
Yeah, I also wanted to say the regulatory clarity and level playing field, but right after that for me comes the finance community. There are enormous investments that need to be made, but it's all related to that clarity. I mean, if it's clearer what the risks are and clearer what the opportunities are, it's clearer for the financial sector to kind of step in and finance the whole energy transition. So I think that for me is the biggest thing that would enable this.
That's great. And Berit?
Yes, I would like to mention three things. The first has already been mentioned, regulations, market-based measure, carbon pricing, also what are green fuels life cycle analysis. The second is really collaboration across the value chain to scale up the production of green fuels. Also, has been mentioned, collaboration with the finance community to get the projects financed, to really get this transition underway. And the third aspect that I would like to mention, that we are very aware that we need to do sort of innovation and implementation at the same time, because we need to continue to innovate as well. This is why we don't think there's sort of one silver bullet fuel. We need to pursue several pathways to, on the one hand side, we need to make impact this decade and decrease our CO2 emissions, and timing is also important here in relation to a carbon budget. But on the other hand, we need to be aware that there will also be innovations that will impact the fuel mix, and we need to deal with both things at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to hear from very different perspectives on the panel. We have about 5 minutes. If there are any questions from the floor, please put your hands up and someone will give you a mic.
Probably a very difficult question, but if you had to put your hat on one fuel for the future, and one for all of you to ask individually or answer individually, if you had to put your hat on one fuel for the future, what do you think it would be?
For inland waterway applications and short sea shipping, it's hydrogen, and for deep sea it will be ammonia and methanol. It has been 3, but when I look at larger amounts, I would say it's ammonia.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to answer this question. I think I will repeat what's been said before. We probably have to prepare for a multi-fuel landscape going forward, and I think future will tell us what that kind of end state fuel is. But I think it's very hard to look past ammonia because it's one of the, truly fully decarbonized fuels. Not fully decarbonized, but close to fully decarbonized fuels, and we have to believe that there's a technical solution to make that happen in the long term.
I'd like to highlight again maybe bio and synthetic versions of fuels that already exist, because there you have the technology actually already working. So maybe a little bit of a cop-out answer, but still.
Yeah, I guess for ports I also already indicated electricity is your big player. But electricity also has its problems, right? So it's if all the equipment works at the same time, you're gonna get major peak loads. If all the terminals are going to be electrified, if everything is electrified. We already see it in the Netherlands, in Europe. There's major problems in building the electricity network quick enough to accommodate all the questions that are out there of additional sources. So even in ports, I can imagine that people will also be looking at other sources, and yeah, I'm not sure yet what that's going to be.
Yeah, and I would also like to comment, because our approach also recognizes that we cannot pinpoint it down to one fuel. Also, because green methanol is a solution, we know it works technically on the vessel. Whereas for green ammonia, we are not there yet. So there are still some uncertainties that we and many others are working on solving at the moment. And this dynamics we need to account for. So as has been mentioned by several other panelists, I would agree with that we don't look into a future where there will be sort of one silver bullet solution. We need to work with a future where there probably will be several types of fuels.
Great question. I was being nice to the panelists, so I didn't ask that one. Are there any others? Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for attending, and thanks to all the panelists for your contributions today. Thank you.